Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you determine, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. Today's book is a fascinating tale about a modern day person hunting down a vampire in an almost obsessive need to get the facts and convincing that vampire to finally share his life story so that they can know. And that book is Interview with the No, I mean, it's Lord of the Dead. It's Lord of the Dead. Lord of the Dead is a book written by the British author Tom Holland and was released on... Well, I couldn't find an exact concrete date. The one I'm trusting most is January 1st, 1995. However, on other sites, I found it labeled as July 1st, 1998. So, the January 1st, 1995 is from the Goodreads website, and I'm going to trust that more than the other ones, because, I mean, it's a place about books, so that's the one I'm going to trust the most. Anyways, the book itself is a bit unique compared to the other ones I've read, in that it takes it kind of combines history with supernatural fiction. Well, historical fiction with supernatural fiction, in a sense. Because it uses a real-life character to tell the story about its vampire. Those of you who don't know, Lord Byron is an actual real-life person who existed. This isn't like someone he made up. Now, admittedly, I didn't know anything about this Lord Byron before I read this book. And I will give the book credit that it actually made me look him up. And the book made me look him up just to, read it out. So, that's a good thing, because I get the feeling I should know more Lord Byron based on some of the things I've seen said about him. But anyways, without further ado, but these are about the ratings I found for the book. They're generally okay. But without further ado, let's get into this review. Hey, that rhymed. Anyways, we'll start where we always do. The cover. Now the cover is actually kind of rather simple. It's kind of a glossy cover, at least for me. I don't know if it's going to translate as well with this. It's sort of like sunset orange in a sense, at least in the background. However, in the main foreground, you have the picture of a gargoyle face kind of coming out and snarling. I don't know, this is obviously a real gargoyle, or if it's not, it's very well drawn. But I don't know exactly which gargoyle it is, but it looks like a picture to me that was put on here and then added a slight gloss and, image effects. Directly on top of that is the Lord of the Dead title along with the author's name. And my version, I'm not sure if this one's going to have it, but my version has a LA's Times quote from Pat Morrison hyping up the book. Now going on to the back, it's sort of simple. It continues the picture of the gargoyle. So you see the body and where it connects to the church it's on. And you get a basic synopsis about the book that I read in my TBR. If you want to see the synopsis read out loud, check out my TBR. It'll also inform you what I'm doing next. And it has a quote hyping up the book from Company, which I guess is an England-based magazine. That's basically all I got from this. And something a little unique that I've never actually seen on a book before, which is an actual little discount thing. Basically saying, because I bought this book, I can go find Tom Holland's new novel, Slave of My Thirst, which just sounds like another vampire book. But because I bought this apparently had, I can do this, take it in, and get $2 off the next book. Obviously, I think this is expired, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But anyways, so that's basically the cover review. It's simple, but it works kind of well for what it's doing. I would have preferred something more relating at hand to the guy it's being written about, like Lord Byron. Like maybe a picture of him. Like even Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, for its absurd premise, it focuses on Abraham Lincoln by him holding a hatchet. You know what I mean? This could really be about anyone. And it's a gargoyle, not really a vampire. I'm getting caught up in the minute details. We'll move on from here. Now, for the synopsis of the book, as I said, I read it in my TBR. The story, basically going into it, the story starts with a young woman attempting to convince a lawyer to give her a key to a crypt. And we don't know why she's so into it until later, but it turns out that it's actually a family crypt, and her mother went down there 20 or 30 years ago and went missing afterwards. So she's hoping by getting the key to this crypt, she can find out what happened to her mother. So after that, she manages to convince the lawyer, despite his huge misgivings and constant attempts to talk her out of it, goes down there and discovers she's discovered upon a titular vampire down there, Lord Byron. And after a bit of talking with him, she finally decides that, you know what, I want to know your life story. Tell me everything because I need to learn it. I just need to know it because you owe it to me. And so this 18th century vampire tells her his life story, and that is the rest of the book. I know what you're thinking. I know the comparison coming to mind. But hold off on it for now, please. Now let's go into what I liked about this book. For the most part, it's really well written, and Holland is able to keep this nice tone throughout the entirety of the book. The opening is just the right level of spooky, but mysterious and creepy at the same time. It keeps you invested. You want to know why this girl is so invested in getting into this crypt her mother went missing, and why she's brushing off every attempt that this lawyer is saying, please don't go down there. In addition to that, when it first starts, Lord Byron's tale is somewhat interesting. Now, like I said, I don't know anything about Lord Byron myself, at least before reading this, but it did inspire me to actually look up the real-life guy. And, yeah, I'm not going to say much about it, but, yeah. And so I'll give it that credit. Another thing that I liked is, although this book tried to do a couple strange things with the vampire mythos, and their powers, effectively, one of the things I did like was the twist on how a vampire remains immortal. And it's just one of those, it helps keep vampires as a menace and a threat, whereas in many, even, I guess, more modern works, I guess is a better way of putting it, you kind of wonder why people wouldn't want to be vampires. You wonder why it's such a torment that they become vampires, in a sense. Like, what's the real downside? And this book, I think, attaches a pretty good downside to being a vampire and what comes with that immortality and power. So yeah, I'm not going to spoil what it is because it's actually a big reveal, but I do think that's pretty good. But we got to go into the things I didn't like. And unfortunately, it's a little bit of a bigger list. To stop beating around the bush, I keep joking about how this is very similar to a previous book that I've read in the past. And that's not without merit. The book is Interview with the Vampire. That is effectively what this book is. It's not so much an homage or inspired by. It comes so close to practically being derivative. I like I said in the past in my Aragon review, just because something is similar to another work doesn't mean that it's bad. However, like I said, this book comes so close to basically just being this Interview with the Vampire, but with Lord Byron instead of a unique character, Louis. To quote, this book is about an 18th century landowner who meets a vampire that turns him, and then proceeds to tell his tale through time until he meets the human who's so desperate to hear his story, who has been otherwise a passive listener to his tale this entire time. Eventually culminating with, well, that's a spoiler, but basically most of the book is a massive monologue as he recounts his tale through from 18th century to modern day. Now, the reason I say this is derivative and it feels like a ripoff is specifically because I don't know why Tom Holland felt the need to go with this interview styling. With Interview with the Vampire, that's the entire point of the book. It's literally called Interview with the Vampire. The whole point is that you are sitting in on an interview with a vampire. But with this one, Holland could have easily have just told this thing in first-person narrative. Or even the third-person narrative from the start, switched into first-person, as a sort of framing device that he is talking about it, but we're effectively seeing it in real time as it happens, like a giant flashback. But no, for some reason Holland just flat out takes Interview with the Vampire's style, and that's what he goes with. And it would, like I said, he should have done something different. He should have done the first person narrative, in my opinion, because it would have fit much better with the book. And then this interview styling actually brings me a couple more complaints that I want to bring up. Now, one of my complaints about Interview with the Vampire is that the interview styling did make it hard to read at times. You basically were hit with constant lengthy paragraphs, and it just went on and on and on. There was no real chapters in the book at all. There were occasional page breaks. For the first half, Anne Rice sort of gave us a break every so often by mentioning how the journalist would stop to replace the tape in his tape recorder, or would light a cigarette while listening. And that was nice because it gave you that small, tiny break, bringing you back to the modern world and just letting you take a small breath and absorb what you've read. But one of the issues was near the end that she just kind of got rid of that entirely, and it was just one giant monologue till the end with the occasional page break as to take your breath. And that made reading the last section really tough.
There's an interesting story behind this, Nickel. In 1957, I remember it was, I got up in the morning and made myself a piece of toast. I set the toaster to 3.
So, and initially, Tom Holland seems like he's gonna make better effective use of his own framing device. You see, he has a better way to keep the audience invested, because Rebecca isn't a journalist. She's under no obligation within the book to remain quiet and just let this guy tell his story uninterrupted for hours on end. This means that Rebecca can be a character of her own, as opposed to the journalist, who really is just a framing device and interview. And while he does get character near the end and the beginning, for the most part, he is there so Louis can tell his story. Like I said, Rebecca isn't under an obligation to be quiet. She could be interrupting. She could comment on what he says. Tell him off for some things, or mention that, she had heard about this, or, well, your real life story says this happened at this time. And it does do that occasionally, but not enough really to justify the framing device it created. It also unfortunately creates some implications behind a couple of the things Byron says that under normal circumstances I would have just chalked it up to being a opinion of the character himself. However, with Rebecca there being an audience member, way too passive, and again, unlike the journalist who has an obligation to hear a story out, it kind of sets the wrong sort of idea about certain things. I'll go a little bit more into that too, but I'll continue on for now and get into that a little bit later. For the most part, this story is just structured like a normal story, which is why I say I don't understand why Tom Holland didn't just make a giant flashback of a book in the first person, or just tell the book in the first person point of view, as opposed to making the interview style. Okay, so you see? This book has actual chapters, unlike Interview with the Vampire, which effectively is a gigantic monologue. There is no chapters. There's page breaks, and that's it. I think for the most part, it feels like this interview styling is almost an excuse for Tom Holland to just create massive, lengthy paragraphs and be justified. Like, the best example for me was in page 91 to 92. So I don't know how well you can see it. No, okay, so you see down here? That's the start of a paragraph. This is the end of the same paragraph on the next page. That paragraph is a page long. And it was really lengthy to read. It wasn't fun. It just felt like it was going on forever. The fact that I can remember not the exact page, but the fact that I can remember the paragraph after all I've read should say something. And to be perfectly honest, that's an issue, to get into another point, that's the issue a book has overall, is it's very slow. It is slow. Like, if you read Interview with the Vampire and thought that was slow, this will put you to sleep. Because it's not even about till halfway through the story that Byron even becomes a vampire. For half of the story, it's kind of just dancing around it. Interview with a Vampire knew that was the draw of the book, was you were being told the life story of a vampire. So when Anne Rice wrote it, she didn't really mess around. She got into Louis being a vampire quickly. And you started seeing his point of view from a vampire. You got to know who he was before that, because that was also a bit important. But for the most part, the story is about the vampire part of Louis' life, not Louis' life. You know what I mean? It seems like a weird complaint when I phrase it like that, but that is what I mean. But it's just like, you know he's going to be a vampire. He's already been revealed to be a vampire. So this very slow build up to it, this constant teasing doesn't do anything but annoy me. Again, like I said, I don't know why Tom Holland didn't just tell this story in the first person, because there would still be question. Does he get turned into a vampire? Is the Lord of the Dead title referring to him, or is it referring to the man who ends up turning him, the Pasha? It just, like I said, it creates that annoyance, and it's just not fun to read through. To move on to the point I mentioned a bit earlier, the unfortunate implications it breeds. Now, like I said, with Rebecca, she wasn't obligated to be a passive listener like the journalist is in an interview. And as I said back then, this meant that Tom Holland could have been creative with how he creates his breaks in the narrative. How he brings us back to the real world to have us take a breath. Make Rebecca a character of her own by having her argue, correct, mention things, just constantly being in the story herself. But she isn't. She does comment here and there, so there is a sense that she's still there occasionally, but for the most part, she's not there anymore once the story starts. Once Byron's story starts, I guess is a better way of saying it. And the reason this leads into unfortunate implications is that Byron will often go into racist or sexist monologues, and she doesn't say anything. She doesn't call him out and say that is some 18th century level thinking there, or that, wow, I didn't realize you hated Greek people that much, because yeah, those lengthy comments about how he hates Greek people. It's not the way it's worded. It's not, this is what I thought at the time. No, it's flat out, he keeps talking about Greek people like he has these really nasty thoughts about them. To put a fine point on it, this is a quote from page 89. I'm not a female, and if I was there, I would have stopped and said, "Okay, whoa, you need to you need correction right now." Okay, God, I thought she's going to cry, and I almost took her there and then, but no, she had the strength and passion of a mountain storm, and I couldn't do it. If she'd been some drab London, well, I was rake enough already to know that a woman cried generally just to lubricate herself.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
But because of things like that, because Rebecca doesn't stop him and say certain things, you're left with the opinion that no. And I want to point out, up until this point, Rebecca has been a very, give me what I want and no one's going to stop me kind of character. So when she's sitting here silently listening to stuff like that, even I want to say something as a guy, it starts to feel less like that's an opinion of a character and more that the character is being a mouthpiece, if you get what I mean. Again, as the disclaimer I always make with these, I am not accusing Holland of anything. I'm merely pointing out that is how it comes off. I'm going to spoil the book here a little bit and state that it has one of the things I find the most squicky, as a way of putting it, ever, and that it has an incestuous relationship within it, and I don't like that. I mean, personally, I just find incest really squicky. And the real-life relationship that it's based on in Lord Byron's backstory it wasn't for sure happening. Like, I get where it came from, and again, this is purely my own implicit bias. Basically, Lord Byron in real life was really close with his half-sister. Some rumors claim that they were intimately close, but other rumors claim that the relationship was purely innocent and they were just really close as siblings. So that's all I'm going to say on that. Again, I really don't like incest, so that's not something I can stand, but yeah. So all in all, 5 out of 10. So unfortunately, when it comes to this, I had a lot to say about this book. More bad than it did good. I was going into this hoping it was really good, and I picked it up because it sounded good. But in the end, I was just kind of met with a very drab and boring story that I've already read before. This is very derivative. This is this close to being derivative of Interview with a Vampire, and there's no sugarcoating that. There's a story, it doesn't make sense why the story is told through that styling either, which only makes it more obvious where its inspiration is from. The easiest way I could describe this book is take Interview with a Vampire, but instead it's a much less charismatic and interesting Lestat telling the story the entire time. That's the best way I can describe it. And it doesn't even really make effective use of its unique blend of fiction and history, in my opinion. I don't feel like I knew anything more about Lord Byron as a person than I did when I started this book. In fact, everything I know about him now is because I looked it up on my own initiative. And I guess I will give the book the credit for that, is that it did make me look up the real person. But in the end, it was just one of those... Now, this isn't my kind of book. But it wasn't bad enough that I would recommend putting it into Mountain Dew. I just probably will personally never read this again. It wasn't very interesting, and I know a book that does exactly the same story much better. If you're looking for a recommendation based on this book, I guess I can say if you really liked Interview with a Vampire and wanted to see another story like that, or you just like vampires, or personally, from what I could see from most of the reviews online, if you were really interested in Lord Byron as a person, because that's where most of the people who seem to rate it high seem to be coming from when they talk about it in their reviews. But personally, I wouldn't recommend this book to anyone in general, especially if you're outside the demographics that really like vampires or Interview with a Vampire. And even then, if you like Interview with a Vampire, you may just get annoyed with how derivative it is. To keep hammering a point. 2 winners and a dud. Unfortunately, that's the sad state of reading horror these days. Don't even get me started on the short stories. You get what... You have to take a chance and hope it comes back great. For that is the reason this nation was built upon. And if this nation didn't build itself on chances, why, it truly would be a damned nation. But until then, remember, with every story comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. Even a bad one.